welcome back to another week of Behind the Lens. I'm Debbie Elias, film critic, creator, and host of Behind the Lens, where we go behind the lens and below the line with those movers and shakers, those film and TV and streaming makers, the producers, directors, writers, actors, cinematographers, production designers, costume designers, film editors, sound editors, mixers, designers, the VFX gurus, composers, stuntmen and women, and so many more. And you all know how much I love film and how much I like to talk. So it's an absolute joy to give you a front row seat to the who, what, where, when, why, and how of movie making with these interviews. And give you a little look into the future right now. I just mentioned stuntmen and women. Well, later this week, I'm interviewing Andy Ruck, who is a stunt coordinator on 2 major series and is being pushed for Emmy Awards consideration. So I'm talking to Andy later this week, which means you're going to get to hear that interview down the line. So, as promised, I teased you last week. Get out the history books. You know, history excites me, as does authenticity. And this week, we're talking all about the religious-themed historical drama, A Great Awakening. Brought to us by director and co-writer Joshua Enck and those terrific folks at Sight and Sound in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. A Great Awakening tells the true story of the unlikely friendship between George Whitefield and Benjamin Franklin, which resulted in one of the most defining moments in American history, the American Revolution. The film is enlightening, eye-opening, engrossing, and entertaining, beyond immersive. To give you a setup, the colonies were on the brink of collapse in 1739, when the Reverend George Whitefield sparks the First Great Awakening, uniting an entire generation with his thundering proclamation of liberty in Christ. In a miraculous turn of events, one of Whitefield's closest friends and greatest promoters becomes none other than Benjamin Franklin. With the nation's freedom hanging in the balance, Franklin discovers true liberty cannot only be written into law, it must be awakened in the hearts of the people. Directed by Joshua Enck and co-written by Joshua, Jeff Bender, and Jonathan Blair, who stars as George Whitefield. A Great Awakening, in addition to Jonathan as George Whitefield, also casts John Paul Sneed as Benjamin Franklin. By way of history, much of what you see unfold within the film talks about the period roughly between 1730, 1750, and then on up to 1787, dealing with the mighty religious awakening, which is referred to as the First Great Awakening, as it began in the colonies, in the 13 original colonies of what is now the United States. Interestingly, awakenings routinely occur every 60 to 80 years or so, and typically are because of severe spiritual decline and or cultural disruption. I know, cultural disruption, your ears are perking up. Are we due for another awakening? Over the course of the U.S. history, there have been 4 Great Awakenings. The First Great Awakening, which is the subject of this film, A Great Awakening, and George Whitefield, and it focused on individual piety, personal salvation. The Second Great Awakening, which was at the tail end of the 1700s, lasting until about 1840s or 50s. That's when camp meetings and new denominations, new religious denominations started appearing in the United States. The Third Great Awakening, the prayer meeting revivals, and that because it was depressed times then in the mid 1800s. So people needed something to hold on to, and this prompted the Third Great Awakening. And then we get the Fourth Great Awakening, which was really 1960s and 70s, associated with the Jesus movement, cultural shifts, Those hot pants and LSD, that'll do it every time. But we're focusing on the First Great Awakening with this film. And it came in waves over many years and actually served as the impetus and connective tissue that united the colonists and definitively led to the Revolutionary War. Now, it has been said, and has been proven, this is fact-based, Reverend George Whitefield and Benjamin Franklin were, quote-unquote, the lightning and the lightning rod that served as the tip of the spear of this awakening. Whitefield through his preaching and Franklin through his newspapers, which covered all of Whitefield's preaching throughout the colonies, and because of Franklin's printing press and his print shop, he printed all of the announcements about Whitefield appearances and all of Whitefield's sermons, which is very important because all of that has been preserved. And that was the basis of the research for this film. Interestingly, now remember, we're back in the 1730s. There was no internet, there was no phone, there was no electricity yet, although Ben Franklin was working on it. Transportation was by horse or horse-drawn something. Yet, over 15% of the colonists came to the faith in Christ, which dramatically affected the moral, spiritual, and political landscape of those early days. During the brief time period that Whitefield was here in the colonies, he preached over 1,800 sermons throughout the 13 colonies, which meant over 80% of the colonists heard him speak in person. Just think about that. It's astounding. And it also gives you an idea of why Whitefield was so impactful and why he was one of those responsible for this great awakening. Now, Whitefield, he's from England. He had his own personal awakening as a youth while studying at Oxford in London. He was only in his early 20s, but he became one of the most powerful preachers of the day and a key instrument of God in the rapid expansion of the gospel up and down the colonies. He originally was a preacher in the English church, and he kind of got kicked out for thinking and not falling in line and believed that everybody was equal. And as I said, over the course of his life, Whitefield preached over 1,800 sermons just in the 13 colonies. And I'm still blown away. 80% of the colonists heard him speak in person. And during this time period, Whitefield was also making trips to and from England and Scotland, and sea voyages were taking like 2.5 years each way. Now, Ben Franklin, and those of us who know anything about Ben Franklin, he was an avowed religious skeptic and a deist. He believed in a higher something, but in no particular God. And he heard Whitefield speak for the first time from the courthouse balcony on Market Street in Philadelphia in 1739. Hearing that one speech and meeting Whitefield, that led them to a lifelong friendship. An unlikely pair, as devout and as much a believer as Whitefield was in God and the gospel. Franklin was at the opposite end of the spectrum, but their respect for each other was immeasurable. Now, there's your setup for the film and where it takes off. The film is elegantly non-linear in its structure. It's bookended with the summer of 1787, an important time in our country's history, as the Continental Congress was deep in debate and argument, sound familiar, trying to hammer out our Constitution. And in case you've forgotten your history, and it's not a spoiler because this is fact, The Constitution was eventually written and signed on September 17th, 1787. Thus, why we have Constitution Day every year on September 17th. The film opens, it's June 1787. We're just shy of 11 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, 4 years since the end of the Revolutionary War. Still without a constitution, Ben Franklin is part of the meeting at the Constitutional Convention, which was held in Independence Hall, where he sits and listens to the heated debates of his colleagues. This is one of the great things about this film. The visuals tell us so much as well. And while Franklin is quietly listening to people piss and moan, he's folding a paper kite, which it's a fun visual as it references his experiments with electricity, a kite and a key. But he's not oblivious to the arguments and what's at stake. And as he's sitting there with everybody droning on, he's reminded of earlier debates he had with his friend George Whitefield, as well as his own childhood. Now, as Franklin's mind wanders, we go back in time 70 years earlier and meet a young Ben Franklin playing with a kite along the Delaware River. His father believed that God's hand was on Ben from the day he was born because he was the 10th son. And if you know your Bible, you know that that's a big thing in the Bible, the 10th. Which is another reason I think how tithing started at like 10%. But don't quote me on that part. But rather than follow in his father's footsteps as a candle maker, Ben wanted to become a pastor as his father wanted him to be. Ben was defiantly adverse to both. Not a candle maker, not a preacher. He wanted to work in his brother's printing shop, which is, his father said, okay, fine. We now come back to 1739, or 1787 rather, and Franklin is at home in his print shop with his grandson Benny. And this is where the story of Franklin and Whitefield really takes shape, as Benny starts to go through a trunk of Franklin's past. He's curious about the Continental Convention and what's happening there, and Franklin says, get my trunk. It's over there. In there is a satchel of journals from 1739. Journals that belonged to George Whitefield. And so, who was George Whitefield? And as Ben Franklin eloquently states, George Whitefield was the revolution. And with that, a great awakening becomes George Whitefield's story and his POV. We are treated to Whitefield's journals and letters between Franklin and Whitefield, among other written documents, with Ben and Benny reading them and very effectively serving as transitions between the past and the present. The attention to historical accuracy and detail in this film is mind-boggling. From the building of the interior chamber of Independence Hall, anybody who's been there, you're going to recognize the paint. You're going to recognize the green tablecloths. You're going to recognize the chairs, the walls, the cornices. But to a complete recreation of 1739 Market Street in Philly. And for this film, Joshua and his entire crew, they built Market Street as it was in 1739. They built it up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And the detail is astounding. From the wood flooring to paint colors and even a working Franklin printing press built from Franklin's own designs. Joshua and his team have left no stone unturned. The cast is immersed. We are immersed. We are transported to 1700s colonial Philadelphia and surrounding areas. But it's the power of performance and the power of the spoken word that mesmerizes and rivets you to the screen. As George Whitefield, Jonathan Blair is spellbinding as he preaches Whitefield's actual sermons. And as you're going to hear Joshua talk about in our interview, he memorized the sermons. So that many of the sermons that you hear, they were being shot as a oneer, as one long take. There was no need to stop. There was no need to regroup. And because they were shooting with more than one camera, you could be shooting the residents, the citizens, with one camera, and shooting Whitefield with the other. You cannot look away when Jonathan Blair is on screen or when he is speaking. His voice is an instrument. It is fantastic. And I dare say he rivals Charlton Heston's Moses and Burt Lancaster's Elmer Gantry for powerful preaching. Blair's passion and conviction immerse him in the role and in the story being told, which translates beautifully for us. We believe because he believes. Now, similarly, John Paul Sneed is a delight as Benjamin Franklin. However, he had a hurdle here. Thanks to Howard Da Silva's indelible, award-winning turn as Franklin on stage and on screen in the film and the play and the musical 1776, Sneed faced the challenge of making his incarnation of Franklin his own. You think of Benjamin Franklin, everybody thinks of Howard Da Silva's performance. But I got to tell you, Sneed succeeds beautifully. He brings a playfulness to scenes where he gets to show off his experiments with electricity. Yes, and I'll put you out of your misery. Yes, including a scene where he is flying a kite in a thunderstorm with a key, and there's a lightning bolt. As well as being he's also a concerned statesman in other scenes, and a loving grandfather yet in others. But put Blair and Sneed together, and they are magnetic. Now, as Franklin did say, he is the lightning rod. Whitefield is the lightning, and the power up above is the source. Now, I got to speak with director and co-writer and founder of Sight and Sound. Sight and Sound Ministries, Sight and Sound TV. Sight and Sound is up until now has primarily been known for their stage productions, faith-based, religious-based stage productions. But Joshua, as we discussed, he highlights the historical authenticity and the creative elements of the film, going into detail about that authenticity, including the fact that 90% of the content is based on Whitefield's original sermons and letters. Now, as you're going to hear, Joshua has great praise for his production team, as they aimed for a truly cinematic experience. Using anamorphic lenses, that was a must by cinematographer Steve Buckwalter, and a score by Chad Marriott that is absolutely beautiful, at times ethereal, and then chorale music and choir is inserted and melded. I want a soundtrack, quite honestly. The editing, I can't say enough about Jordan Graff's editing, because the transitions are seamless, which is very difficult in a non-linear story. But he maintains audience engagement. And also, what I love about this film is that so often, and you all know this, when we go back and forth with timelines or memories, directors will opt for sepia tones or, a fog or a haze or a cheesecloth Greta Garbo effect to delineate between past and present. Here, the color is saturated all the way through. The continuity, visual continuity is fantastic. So that as Ben and Benny Franklin are reading these journals, are talking, and we go back in time, everything is vivid. Ben Franklin is living this again. It's as if it's just happening right now for him. And the words are so powerful, it's as if it's happening right now for Benny. So I love this. We don't have the visual distortion. So we can really focus on the story and these individuals. So I really love the work that Jordan did with editing and what Steve did with the lighting and the lensing there. But the bottom line for Joshua is at the forefront of everything is the importance of faith and teamwork in the film's creation. By the way, the costumers made from scratch between 1,500 and 2,000 wardrobe pieces just for the Market Street sets. The casting, the amount of people, not to mention horses, dogs, oxen, chickens, and kids. It's long been said, W.C. Fields once said, don't ever work with animals and kids. Well, Joshua just brought it all on here. With hundreds and hundreds of people. This truly is like a Cecil B. DeMille production, let me tell you. But enough of my prattling, enough of my history lessons. Take a listen as Joshua Enck discusses A Great Awakening. Hey, Joshua, how are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm very excited to be speaking with you about A Great Awakening.
Great. Thank you for having me.
I love this film. Absolutely love it.
So thankful to hear that.
I'm from Philly. So I spent my entire childhood going to Carpenter's Hall, Independence Hall, Ben Franklin's house, since they've done in the past 15, 16 years, they actually have done excavations at his house, and you can go and you can see the kitchen, the stove, built into the ground. I love the history. So
I'm right there with you. I was born and raised in Lancaster County, and so I have frequented Philadelphia myself, and have seen all the things that you mentioned. Not as many times as you, but certainly plenty.
But did you actually get to touch the Liberty Bell?
Yes, I did.
Okay, you're old enough. All right, you're in my...
Yep,
okay.
I did.
It shocks...
Oh, that beautiful bell.
It shocks people when I tell them every year in elementary school we take the field trip to Center City, and that's when the Liberty Bell had been lowered from the tower, and it was sitting there in that foyer going out to the back courtyard, and you could touch it. And now people, they can't get near it since 1976.
Yeah. Well, so truth be told, maybe I should be careful saying this, but I was able to touch it even in its current location, but we'll keep that between us.
I'm jealous. Joshua.
I was born in 1976, so I was a bicentennial baby. I was born to be patriotic. So
I think you were.
I had to touch that ball.
I got about 20 years on you. So okay. Something that stood out for me, and I'm going to get into the Market Street construction in a minute.
Okay.
My eldest nephew lives in Lancaster, not too far where you guys were filming.
Okay.
But something that I really appreciated, because it's such a famous scene in Independence Hall where signing of the Declaration, even before then, all the statesmen gather. You stuck to the traditional paint colors that are so well known, because those are very specific paint colors inside Independence Hall.
We went through painstaking, exercises to match it as best as possible. We didn't want to phone anything in. We wanted to stay true and authentic to what we know, and especially with that space, that beautiful sacred place, that so many things have taken place, and so we were able to rebuild that entire room in our shop here and shoot it here in our own backyard. And something fascinating, when my production designer measured how much flooring we needed in Independence Hall here for our shop, he called me and he said, "Do you know how many square feet we just ordered for the flooring?" I said, "I have no idea." He said 1,776. 1776.
Oh my gosh.
I said, you are kidding me. And he said, I'll show you the receipt. And sure enough, he did. So there's some really cool stories like that all along the way from making this film.
Well, I personally think divine intervention had a hand in the making of this film.
100%. 100%, Debbie.
Just the entire topic and bringing Whitefield to the forefront. Because unless you really know history or if you are a student of Ben Franklin and his history, or a divinity or religious person, people don't know about Whitefield. And
yeah, you're right.
So that, number one, really thrilled me, that's who this really focuses on. Because while Franklin is a big part of this story, you really keep your eye on the ball and keep us in Whitefield's POV. So this is his story, and Franklin becomes a wonderful scene transition interstitial device as he talks with his grandson Benny.
Yeah.
And that is
Lightning Rod Jr.
That's such a creative way to tell this story, Joshua. So I'm curious how you and your co-writers, Jeff and Jonathan, how the three of you came up with this structure.
Yeah. Honestly, it was just inspired. All I can say is it was inspired. I've never read of an account or seen any kind of depiction, where they built a relationship between Franklin and his grandson. I remember sitting out in my backyard on a Saturday or a Sunday. I can't remember exactly what it was, like 3.5 years ago when we first started working on the script of this film. And when I learned about Ben Franklin's grandson, and his name was Lightning Rod Jr., and that Ben Franklin built for him a print shop in front of his own house in the spring that preceded the Constitutional Convention of 1787, I called Jeff Bender, my writing partner, and I said, this is gold. The fact that his grandson had, a partially complete print shop being built in front of Ben Franklin's house. His name is Lightning Rod Jr. He has a printing business. And Ben Franklin's coming home from the Constitutional Convention, and it was a mess of a convention. Like, who better to hear the story, to be the surrogate audience member than his grandson, who is curious. So that was gold. When you find those things, that's when the story starts to write itself, the script. And so it was an original idea, and it was inspired.
Now, I'm curious, because we have so many incredible monologues for Jonathan as Whitefield. Did you have any of the original text from Whitefield?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, in fact, all of his sermons that Whitefield preached were original sermons.
Oh, wow.
And he had hundreds of sermons because, and we know about them because guess who printed them?
Ben Franklin.
And so we have literal copies of most of George Whitefield's sermons, also his journals, his diary entries. And so a lot of this, 90% of this film is based on fact.
Wow.
And truth. And so John Blair actually was one of our co-writers. We have 3 writers on this film, and John Blair, who played Whitefield, I turned him loose on the sermons. I said, look, here's what they need to say. So find a sermon that, talks about liberty. Find a sermon that talks about religion being a thing that's in the way from relationship. And so, he did. And then what he did is he memorized those sermons. And when we went to film, they were all one big long takes. And then we found a way to cut them together and make them concise. But yeah, literal letters still exist between Whitefield and Franklin. There's a letter that he writes, towards the middle of the film, that Whitefield writes Ben Franklin about his electrical experiments and, considering the things of the Holy Spirit. Like, that's all true. Those are real letters that existed.
And those sermons are beyond powerful. And even a lot of Franklin's dialogue, at the 40-minute mark, you've got Franklin saying, well, Washington is there, and Washington is recalling Valley Forge. It was dark, but today is even darker. And that little speech, if we planted a tree of independence, but its trunk is being hacked and the tree is about to fall. And he's begging Franklin to talk to the conventioneers, to come together, to create a constitution. And so incredible. And you follow that up, you cut us back to England, and we see the headspace that Whitefield is in at that point. And the whole idea of choosing to accept Christ and baptism in the river. Just absolutely wonderful back and forth with powerful, powerful dialogue and sermon. And by the time you get to the coal mines, at like the 50-minute mark, my God, Joshua, that one scene, the coal mine scene of the dirtiest and the poorest of the poor, is beyond. Your heart stops watching it. You not only have the words, and Jonathan is just such a powerful speaker. He would rival Elmer Gantry and win every time. But it's production-wise. I look at what Steve Buckwalter does with the lighting and the lensing, and how he picks up sun flares at very key moments, such as when the miners are coming out covered in coal. At the same time, your sound design, Whitefield's words are echoing almost like the voice of God. It made me think of Cecil B. DeMille God talking to Moses in the Ten Commandments.
Amazing. That's quite a compliment. Wow. Thank you, Debbie.
So you have covered every element of production here to bring this to life. So I'm curious, because we have such powerful scenes, and I could talk about the scenes in this film for hours on end. I got news for you. But talk to me about how you and Steve developed your visual grammar here, because you bring us intimacy, you have intimate moments, but then we have a lot of wide angle, all-encompassing for all the citizens, for all of the workers, for the rich, the poor, and even the 30,000 people beyond the 20,000 that live in Philadelphia. So how did you and Steve develop the visual grammar here to be so visually impactful?
Great question, and thank you so much for your affirmation. Truly, Debbie, it just warms our heart. Warms my heart to hear that what we set out to do is achieving what it was meant to achieve, and that's to move people's hearts towards the center of the story, which leads people to a place of reflection and also hope and inspiration. The scenic qualities of this film are really rooted in the DNA of Sight and Sound's brand. We've been doing live stage productions for 50 years. We have a theater here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, one in Branson, Missouri, where we bring the Bible to life. The biggest Bible stories that are in the Bible, we bring to life on a 300-foot wraparound immersive stage. And when we started making movies 5 years ago, we wanted to carry that DNA over into our filmmaking. So we wanted the anamorphic lenses. We wanted the wide landscapes. We wanted to show scope. We wanted to show scope in our score. We wanted to show scope with literal people and crowds. And the lens flares, that's all intentional. We wanted to make it feel like it's a real moment and not too packaged. And then beyond that, I grew up watching movies from the 80s and the 90s, the big Spielberg films, and so did Steve. So we're kind of a product of 90s cinema, which was Dances with Wolves and Braveheart and Schindler's List and these big, massive films that were just like a feast for the eyes. And so we referenced those films. We wanted to create a big cinema experience. We kept talking about how can the experience of this film visually match the vocal projection of George Whitefield, who can reach 30,000. So, if you'd see our war room, where we meet, where the script meets the screen and the script meets the stage, we pulled so many reference pictures from our own photography to moments in other films, and we just surrounded ourselves, with these textures, tones, colors, framing, and I love that part of the process. It's just the dreaming part. So, but the color saturation and all that was all intentional, and I'm so thankful that you picked up on all of that.
Well, the color, for me, as I'm looking at your Market Street scenes, it's just like walking through Center City, Philadelphia, walking down Elfreth's Alley, and seeing those colors, the color of the brick, and then the contrasting doors that used vibrant colors, like a bright, bright white or a bright red. So the authenticity, I felt like I was walking in colonial Philadelphia.
Well, and you would know.
And
you were born and raised there, and I love Elfreth Alley. It's just a great feast for the eyes walking down that little alley. And we matched brick patterns, we matched colors. It's not just white, but it's a specific kind of white.
Yeah.
Whether it's like and the colonial color palette. Personally, it's my favorite color palette anyway. So it was really easy to want to do those things. But yeah, what we wanted to do, Debbie, we didn't want to just impress people with our attention to detail. We wanted to do it so that it didn't distract from the story that's taking place.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted it to be a storytelling device, not a distraction. And so we really wanted to do everything right so that we could enter that world, go back in time, and bring the story to life.
Well, you definitely succeeded. It is beyond immersive. Another big part of that is your editing, is Jordan Graff's editing on this, because you keep us engaged and taking us back and forth in time. I'm sure you know that with so many films, as you're doing time jumps, going back and forth. Number one, most filmmakers will switch to like a sepia tone or something like that, and it's very disjointed in a nonlinear fashion. At no time does this feel disjointed, and thankfully you keep everything saturated and filled with color, so we are in the moment. As Ben and Benny are reading the journals of Whitefield, and we are transported, it is as if it is happening right at that moment. And this is so critical in the editing process here. So I'm curious about the challenges of the editing that you had with Jordan.
Yeah, well, there's no challenges for me with working with Jordan. He is a master class in post-production and editing. And he and I Heard the Bells together, which was Sight and Sound's first film back in 2022. And when you spend that many hours together in a dark room, cutting film together, and there's endless footage and endless possibilities, you get to know each other's style pretty quickly. And so that chemistry that him and I have, that trust that we have, is really something. But they say in the film industry that the movie is made 3 times. It's made in the original script, and then you remake the movie when you're shooting it, and then you remake the movie again in the editing room. And so, it goes through that evolution and that organic process to get to the final result. But the transitions that you're referring to were super intentional, and you have to know them, obviously, when you go into shooting. And I knew that it was going to be key to not lose the audience, because a lot of artists out there, filmmakers, they do art for art's sake. They do it for themselves. And if people don't understand it or get it, they are okay with that. But I feel differently. I feel like we have a responsibility as storytellers to not lose our audiences, to make it easy for them to track along, not give everything away, not spoon feed everything, certainly not. But I don't at any point in the film want people to go, wait, where am I now? Pause the movie. Who is that guy? That drives me crazy, when I watch a movie. And so we really were intentional about that, whether you're, a baptism at the coal mine where the water goes from clear to black because of the dirt from the soot, to the pouring of the coffee transition, the door knocks, when when John Wesley is checking in on George Whitefield, who's in really bad shape, and that door knock becomes George Washington's, Ben Franklin's print shop. Like, all of that was super intentional to try to keep the audience engaged and connected.
Well, you definitely succeed on that level, Joshua. Now, I do have to ask you about the music. Music
Sure.
is so critical here, and you have some really, in addition to so many quote-unquote needle drops throughout the film, you've got beautiful score happening, but then it's some very pivotal moments. You bring in the music, it's not just a choir, but there are moments where it's almost like an ethereal chorale that we're hearing echoing in the background. What were you looking for musically with this film?
I was looking for exactly what we got, and then some. The composer that I worked with, his name's Chad Marriott. He comes to us from England, and he's a big sound guy. Like, he likes the big epic scores, and some of his heroes, would be people who wrote soundtracks for the films that have become part of our lives,
Mm-hmm.
And so we knew that we wanted a really big score. We wanted a lot of strings, a lot of brass. We wanted a vocal component to it, because I feel like when you have a choir, it's such a otherworldly component to a score. It just really takes you to a very intimate place, a personal place. And so we knew we wanted to incorporate choir. And so when we recorded this score in Nashville, you do the strings and the woodwinds first, and then you do the brass separate, and then you do the vocals separate. And so, when you're recording all of it, you don't have it all put together, but when you finally put it all together, you realize what you have. It's an incredible experience. And so the score was original, super intentional around all of it. I always say sound is half of what you see.
Yep.
And so we want to create and evoke emotion and feeling just through score. And, man, I'll tell you, when you have an amazing moment about to happen, like when Franklin's about to give that big famous speech at the convention at the end of this film, and you hear that English horn come
Mm-hmm.
in, it's just like, okay, your soul, there's something spiritual that happens, with your soul when it's the right music at the right time, creating and evoking the right mood and feeling that nothing else can do. And so that's what we strived for, was, not impressive music, but the right music.
Well, you definitely have it there. And the instrumentation, as you said, is just so critical and works so well. Now, I know before Maggie disconnects me, I love her to pieces, but I know she's going to do it to me. I have to ask, what did you, as a storyteller and a director, learn about yourself in making a great awakening that you can take forward into future films?
That's easy. Lean not on your own understanding, but in all ways acknowledge God, and He will direct your path. That's a verse that I always knew from the Bible, but it's become even more real to me now, because I think especially creatives and artists, they think that the greatest ideas need to come from them, and they need to be the curator of them and then the caretaker of those ideas and force those ideas to happen. But for me, it was about being inspired by my faith in Christ, and then having a team around me that shares that vision, and not making it about ourselves, but making it about the story that's meant to be told. There's an acronym that I've used often, which is the word EGO, E-G-O, stands for edging God out. And with this film, every detail of it, we didn't want to do that. We didn't want to make it about ourselves, how cool we are and how good we can be, but we wanted to point people toward something beyond ourselves, which we believe is the Lord.
Well, I think you definitely succeeded in that, and you did it without being preachy and slamming conversion down people's throats, which, as you know, can happen.
On the receiving end of that, and unfortunately probably have been on the leading edge of that as well at times. But I really sincerely appreciate you saying that, Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joshua, and I hope we get to chat again in the future.
Spread the word. April 3rd. The movie comes out this weekend.
Good Friday. Yep. Thank you. And that was Joshua Enck talking about all things A Great Awakening. And you can see the film for yourselves right now in theaters. I think it's playing in 1,289 theaters across the country right now. It just opened this past Friday for Easter weekend. But that's it for today's show. I'll be back next week with more interviews and film discussions. And as I mentioned at the top, be on the lookout for my interviews on the website and here on the podcast for Emmy Awards consideration. I've already got 2 big ones scheduled this week with more to come. Plus, I've got a chat tomorrow with director Ben Wheatley that I'm very excited about because we're going to talk about his new film starring Bob Odenkirk called Normal. It is a must-see film. I'll just tell you that. But make sure you check out BehindTheLensOnline.net. A lot of new content, new interviews, new movie reviews, including my full review of A Great Awakening. And don't forget, hitting theaters wider this week, Hamlet. Don't tell me you don't like Shakespeare. I'm not the biggest fan of Shakespeare, but I got to tell you, that movie is so well done. Directed by Anil Karia, written by Michael Leslie. My review is already up on the website for Hamlet. And my interview with Anil, I was lucky enough to get an interview with him just the other day. So that will be up probably by the time you hear this show. So there's a lot in theaters. There's a lot going on. And don't forget to look up in the sky and follow Artemis, the adventures of Artemis 2. So until next week, I'm Debbie Elias. This is Behind the Lens.